Episode 28 of the BloodStream Podcast is brought to you by Shire, a global leader in delivering treatments for people with hemophilia and other bleeding disorders. With over 22,000 employees across more than 100 countries, Shire's expanded global reach and best-in-class products offer the potential to help even more patients around the world with significant unmet needs. Visit shire.com today. Happy fall. Happy back to school season and all the rest. I hope it's treating you well. We have a big show today, which includes my interview with NHF CEO Val Bias and Senior Vice President Don Rotellini, previewing the 70th Annual Bleeding Disorders Conference, which is now only weeks away. And that is very exciting for the community in general and for BloodStream Media and Believe Limited specifically, because we've got some really neat programs and kind of landmark moments that are coming up for us at this conference. The 4th Annual Teen Impact Awards, which will honor 71 teens affected by bleeding disorders, will take place on Thursday, October 11th at 8 p.m. during the conference. So after opening session finishes and you get your first loop in through the exhibition hall, come celebrate these incredible young people at the Teen Impact Awards. And a shout out to our sponsors for that: Shire, CSL Behring, NCHS, and Spark Therapeutics. On Friday, October 12th at 7:15 a.m., it's early, but it's worth it. It's the first community screening of Bombardier Blood, the feature-length documentary that I've directed about Chris Bombardier, the first hemophiliac mountaineer to climb Mount Everest, and his historic 7 Summits mission to both climb the tallest mountains on every continent and raise awareness for hemophilia around the world. There's a breakfast symposium that is sponsored by the film's supporter, Octapharma. Thank you to Octapharma, at 7:15 a.m. on that Friday morning. So there will be breakfast. There'll be the first screening of the film, which is just, I can't believe it's finally happening. And then a Q&A with Chris and I, followed by a raffle that we'll be presenting in the exhibition hall that ties in Save One Life. And there's some really cool items from Chris's Adventures of a Hemophiliac brand, this amazing 7 Summits coffee table book that Believe Limited's been building for the last few months, and we'll have a display of that. So actually, speaking of the exhibition hall, stop by our booth. We have a booth this year, booths 26 and 27. There'll be information about the Teen Impact Awards and Bombardier Blood and our comedic web series, Stop the Bleeding, the podcasts, Breaking Through our musical theater workshop, Powering Through our inspirational speaker series. So just stop on by. We'll have guests be from our programs coming through. We have some cool handouts. We're going to be doing some podcast recordings. So a lot going on over at the booth. Speaking of our podcast, though, our latest Ask the Expert features career counselor Don Moulter. Our latest Powering Through podcast features a clinician panel from last year's NEHA Fall Fest. So you can listen to 4 experts talk about some of the recent trends and updates in our community on the most recent Powering Through podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe to the BloodStream Podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Help us out and give us a rating on iTunes. That does help other people find the show. So stop on by the iTunes store, look up the BloodStream Podcast, give us a little rating, write a little review if you would. And you can stay in touch with us on social, facebook.com/BloodStream Media, @BloodStream Info on Twitter, or email us, mailbag@BloodStreamMedia.com. Hello and welcome to the BloodStream Podcast, episode 28, September 17th, 2018. I'm Patrick James Lynch.
And I'm Natalie Lynch.
On this episode, National Hemophilia Foundation's 70th Annual Bleeding Disorders Conference takes place October 11th through the 13th at the Orlando World Center Marriott in Orlando, Florida. NHF Senior Vice President Don Rotellini and Chief Executive Officer Val Bias give us a look ahead at the conference during today's interview segment. Trustee of the UK Haemophilia Society, Clive Smith, tells his Ironman story in today's Share segment. Natalie presents a recent article on wearables and the gamification of health. Are we sure this is working? And I'll walk us through the controversial article in The Atlantic last month on hemophilia and gene therapy titled "The Patients Who Don't Want to Be Cured." Ooh, what a title.
This is not October yet. It's not our Halloween themed one.
All that plus news in 60 seconds, parting shots, and more coming up on this episode. Welcome to BloodStream. Well, you know, so what if we do the spooky stuff starting now in September? We'll find something
You're
else
just
for
like
October.
CVS.
I am, you know. I get that a lot.
And Trader Joe's this week, full of pumpkins.
Was it really?
Yeah.
I guess so. As soon as you go back to school, it's like, let's get the pumpkins out. There's no like next thing.
No.
It goes right into, which is kind of stinks for Labor Day in a way. It really is only celebrated for its like barbecue ability.
And day off.
Yeah. Otherwise, we're just focused on like school. The NFL is back. Oh, pumpkins. Labor Day is just the day off where we barbecue.
Yeah. I mean, and now that I'm a part of a union, I should give a little more reverence, I think, to Labor Day.
That's true. Yeah. Natalie, how are you feeling about Labor Day? Tell us about it.
I mean, I didn't feel celebrated.
You didn't feel celebrated? You didn't feel like it was about you?
I didn't feel like it was about me.
All right. Well, fair enough.
Yeah. But I'm excited about the pumpkins and fall.
Yeah.
And this is like the first fall in LA, like officially for me in this house, and like what that means to like do seasons in Southern California. But like today felt like a fall morning. Like I was outside with my coffee. It was chilly, California chilly, that is.
Right. Yeah. All things relative. We also now have kids who are friends with toddlers. So.
We also now have kids. Since the BloodStream podcast.
Since episode 27.
We got kids.
It's been a really busy time. We'll cover that later in the comment segment.
That'll be my parting shot.
We have children now. That would be a funny way to deliver that information. Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. And I'm excited to see the little toddlers in their Halloween outfits this year. So that'll be fun.
I wonder if we'll get trick-or-treaters.
Oh yeah,
to our front door.
I wonder. We live in like at the end of a cul-de-sac, so you have to like want to come down this way. You don't pass by our house, so I wonder.
Yeah.
It's funny. I've always kind of lived in houses or in situations where I've wondered if I'm going to get trick-or-treaters. It's never been clear. It's like been in an apartment building or like our streets like at the end of a dead end.
Yeah.
There's always been some reason I'm like, I don't know. But then if I buy 400 mini Milky Ways and Snickers.
They're just for you.
Yeah. And they'll be eaten by November 4th and I'll be vomiting by November 5th. So
we do have kids across the street, so
I think plan for some.
We have to go introduce ourselves, and then one of the questions is how much Halloween candy should we buy for this neighborhood?
Are we supposed to do that? Like go like introduce ourselves in like a formal way?
Yeah, we haven't done that yet. But
we also haven't talked about it until this moment.
Yeah, that's a neighborly thing to do.
Okay.
So
the kids, my immediate social anxiety goes up.
Yeah, I'll lead the way.
Also, okay, because also I'm like, I don't know what to say. I'm like, hey, I moved in nearby.
I mean, I think technically they should be bringing us pies, but I'll bake some and...
Oh, we're going to bring goods?
Yeah.
Oh,
that's
wow.
That's how you get in good.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. I don't know. I would just knock on the door and be like, hi. Like, I don't know.
And then they would be like, please keep our children away from that weirdo.
That's why you need to lead the way.
All right. So back to BloodStream.
Community news in 60 seconds?
Let's do it.
All right. So community news in 60 seconds. That'll be the first segment before, as I just ran down in the ramp up, we got some great stuff. Great interview segment. Like, share, comment. But as always, we're going to start off with news in 60 seconds, which is, as it sounds, community news delivered in 60 seconds. Catch what you can. Check the program notes for the rest. Natalie, you want to kick us off? We haven't even done a rehearsal of this yet.
I would love to, because I love
right
this first story.
All right. Well, then in that case, let me get the timer out. Are you doing like some stretches over there? Or what are you doing?
Yeah, I'm stretching my neck out.
That's okay. All right. Good. I appreciate
me.
Yeah, do the me.
You.
Yeah. Community news in 60 seconds starts now.
11-year-old VWD patient Daniela Delgado is the creator and owner of Daniela's Little Witch, which will soon be a 503c nonprofit that bakes beautiful homemade cakes for kids facing serious illness. For 7 years, Daniela's Little Witch has been working tirelessly to bring smiles to children in serious need of cheering up.
Yeah, more or less. The Jacobs School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences at the University of Buffalo has received an $890,000 grant, question about that last $10,000, from the Hemophilia Center of Western New York to support a career development award aimed at addressing a shortage of physicians in the region who specialize in treating non-malignant blood disorders. That's actually amazing.
Unicure announced that it has treated the first patient in its phase 2B dose confirmation study of the AMT 061.
19 seconds.
An investigational
AAV.
Virus AAV gene therapy intended to treat patients with hemophilia B.
CSL Behring announced that Delvion is now available in 3,500 IU vial sizes, reducing the reconstitution time needed in multiple vials for a similar dose. 5 seconds.
Catalyst Biosciences announced its peer-reviewed publication of previously reported. Oh, shoot.
That's like the very end. That's the end.
Yeah, we could have done better. I mean, I always say that, but yeah, I'm a perfectionist.
We also never alter the way we do it, so we never apply anything where we could have done. That's not true. That's not true.
Sometimes we rehearse.
We do.
But for the rest of these stories and more details on them, you can find it in our program notes.
Yeah, links and more in the program note. Now for our episode 28 like segment from Natalie. Fitness trackers turn health into a game that users rarely win. Ooh. Natalie, wearables, health, and gamification. Is it good or is it bad? What does this article tell us?
I thought it was an interesting article because you think that wearables would help people lose weight more and be more active. Google's coming out with the Google Fit, and what they're doing is they're basing their metrics on forthcoming physical activity guidelines for Americans, which was published 10 years ago in 2008, and now this fall, new guidelines are coming out.
Who publishes this?
It is put together by the American Heart Association as well as the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Okay.
Previously, the 2008 version of the physical activity guideline recommended physical activity in bouts of at least 10 minutes long.
Right.
The 2018 version will do away with this stipulation and will encourage physical activity of any kind and any length.
So we're giving up. The new guidelines have given up.
They're just like, move your body.
All right.
So the Google Fit will use these new guidelines to have two metrics. One's called heart points and move minutes. So that's how they're going to...
So wait, I have a question here.
Sure.
So this is obviously, in addition to being an article on some health, like a big commercial.
Kind of anthropological. Oh, commercial?
Well, it's a commercial for Google Fit too, right? Like I'm looking at an ad at the, like,
right.
This is a Google Fit commercial.
It
so
is,
where's the interesting health information?
So the interesting thing is it's saying the Google Fit's going to take on new metrics.
Okay.
But
that are taking into account these new 2018 revised guidelines.
Right.
Okay.
So based on what we know from wearables so far, is it won't, because although it's going to take into consideration these new guidelines, what wearables don't do is motivate humans.
How does it break that out?
There have been a couple studies, right? In 2016, researchers at the University of Pennsylvania tracked 470 adults. They were divided into two groups, and they tracked them for 2 years.
Okay.
The participants were on similar diets, received group counseling, text message prompts, and they were told to exercise more. One group had wearables and one group did not. The group without wearables lost 13 pounds on average, where the group with wearables lost 7.7.
Oh boy. Okay.
Knowledge is power, but it's not necessarily motivation, I think is what this article summarizes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, if these aren't motivating, why is Google Fit important, I guess? Does the article address that?
That it's going to be the only wearable that bases its metrics on the new guidelines.
On the new guidelines, okay.
So
I guess
and maybe these new guidelines are supposed to be more motivating, like
right.
that if you can move your body at all for any amount of time. Yeah. And now the Google Fit's going to track that.
I mean, you said earlier, like with what's different in 2018 versus 2008, and I'm not a nutrition, I'm not an expert in any of this, but it does seem to me that we need to find ways to do the really hard work, which is to motivate people.
Well, and the interesting thing is, I mean, and I'm not trying to knock anyone's job, but like, who knows these guidelines?
Right. Like,
doctors maybe they're given the new publication and it's try and tell your patients just to move your body whenever and however much you can.
If we have an obesity crisis, then it seems like the kind of response that you might give in an obesity crisis is like, just freaking move, man. Like,
move your bodies.
It does have that kind of feel in a way. If we were a very healthy country, it doesn't feel like we would need so liberal a guideline on movement as just do anything, you know, like that kind of bakes into the cake the problematic nature of our obesity and mobility issues, which we know is all the more problematic in our population and other chronic disease populations.
The article goes on to say too, like, so not only does it kind of say wearables aren't helping the weight slide off,
right,
but it also criticizes them a little bit, which makes
gamification.
Well, not the gamification. That can be motivating to some people. It's motivating to you. You like it. But that the surveillance aspect.
It actually, I find it a little comical that people who carry a phone in their pocket with GPS coordination somehow think that putting a thing on your wrist is
evolving
that in any way.
Yeah.
It's not different. It's
wearable technologies also use metrics to advertise to you. So the article says that you're more likely to run a marathon at age 29, age 39, or age 49. But this wearable technology is saying, let's really target the people whose pulse is up for long periods of time every day that are in these age brackets. So even if you're not Googling new running shoes, wearing your Fitbit or your Google Fit or your, Nike, whatever, it also is feeding these companies. And some people care about that. But you know what? To be honest, when I open and I have very targeted ads, I don't know. I kind of like it. I'm like, oh, you delivered me what I don't have to now go look for.
But if to get to that mutually agreeable end result, there is an invasion of your privacy and information and a surveillance of your habits online, on the internet, geographically through geolocating. Does all of that invasion of your information, does that justify the convenience of being marketed a great product?
I mean,
open question.
I don't know. But yeah, and then it goes on to say like marathon runners or people with chronic illnesses, for example, may feel empowered by the data their devices provide, even at the price of privacy. What looks like a giant advertisement actually brings about a little bit of question and criticism. And
according to a 2016 essay in PLOS Medicine, that's an open journal, 1 in 6 U.S. consumers used wearable technology. And it predicted that 110 million fitness devices were likely to be sold in 2018. I don't know if that came to be, but interesting that in 2016, at least, it was 1 in 6.
The studies say it's maybe not helping with weight, but I can't imagine.
But there's more than just weight too. Like I'm more aware of my sleeping patterns. I'm more aware of my heart rate and blood pressure and its conjunction with like when I'm feeling tired or anxious or frustrated, I can track how it affects my heart rate. And like there's so much information beyond just like there's plenty of people who are trying to lose weight unsuccessfully.
Well, the other interesting thing is the study that talks about, the group who didn't wear the wearables lost 13 pounds and the group who did lost 7.7. That's still 7.7 pounds that someone who was not doing anything wouldn't have lost. So I guess like maybe they're questioning how much is it moving the needle.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's hurting. And, and they were like, and how much is it moving the needle at what price? And a lot of companies, like I know my mother works for the Cleveland Clinic and if she wears a Fitbit, they get a discount off their insurance.
Right.
Which is cool. And I know other companies do that as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the article came out early September in Popular Science if you'd like to read it. And the link to it is in the program notes.
Thank you, Natalie. BloodStream Podcast, episode 28, share segment comes to us from a UK Haemophilia Society trustee member, Clive Smith, a piece titled Iron Out the Obstacles. This Ironman athlete shares the dedicated path he's on to push his fitness and challenge himself. Let's take a listen to this share segment from Clive Smith.
Iron out the obstacles. Born with severe haemophilia A in 1980, I am the youngest of 3 brothers, all with severe A. Being on demand, we spent much of our early years having bleeds into various joints, particularly our ankles. In the late 80s, I started home treatment and prophylaxis. The result was undoubtedly life-changing. Gone were the weekly bleeds, and I began to lead a relatively normal life with the odd breakthrough bleed. Sport had played a minor part in my life during my teens and 20s. I played basketball at school and went to the gym. I played a bit of football in my early 20s too. In my early 30s, following my wife's example, having run the London Marathon, I decided I would like to do some running. After only 6 to 8 weeks, things came to a grinding halt when I had a serious and sustained bleed in my left ankle. I was rendered unable to walk and took nearly a month off work. Determined not to be defeated, I started again, more slowly this time. I worked on my weaknesses at the gym and slowly built up my running. I quickly realised that I could not run every day, and so the obvious solution to improving my fitness was cross-training, end to the cycling and swimming. Again, through my wife, I was inspired to try a triathlon. My first experience went well, despite me standing on a riverbank at 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning, wondering why I wasn't in bed. By the end, I was hooked and couldn't wait for my next one. Over the next 4 years, I gradually increased the distance and completed 2 half Ironmans. Craving a greater challenge, I entered Ironman Zurich in 2014. There, I completed a 3.86 kilometre or 2.4 mile swim, followed by a 180.25 kilometre or 112 mile bike and a marathon run, in that order with no breaks. Since then, I've completed 2 more Ironmans and challenged Roth in Germany, an iron distance race in 2018. This one was particularly special as I completed it with a German haemophiliac with severe A. In May, I spoke at WFH's World Congress about my sport. The overwhelming response from the room was positive, with lots of questions being asked, but one of the doctors I spoke with was not so enthusiastic, a sign that we have a long way to go, convincing some medical professionals that we don't need to be wrapped in cotton wool every day. On the last night of the conference, I met a lady with von Willebrands who was doing her first triathlon in a few weeks, and a Brazilian haemophiliac spoke to me about a friend of his with severe A who completed Ironman Brazil last year. It seems we are not alone. The path to completing an Ironman has not been straightforward. It's taken resilience and determination. I've been incredibly well supported by my wife and my physiotherapist. Without support of my haemophilia team, it definitely wouldn't have been possible. Completing an Ironman is a feat for any human being, let alone someone with a severe medical condition. For those wondering or questioning if they could do something that seems impossible, I'd encourage you to at least try. Take that first step. It doesn't have to be an Ironman, but ask yourself, what's my Ironman? And then get to work.
The BloodStream Podcast is made possible by Shire. Did you know the Shire ACES Scholarship recognizes academic achievement in the rare disease community by providing 3 $5,000 scholarships to eligible community members? To learn more, visit shireaces.com.
Thank you, Clive, for that share segment contribution. If you'd like to read Clive's piece in blog form, visit bloodstreampod.com/blog, link as well in the program notes. Now on to the comments segment. If you haven't heard, August 29th, there was an article published in The Atlantic titled, "The Patients Who Don't Want to Be Cured." A hemophiliac says his genetic order is part of his identity, and therapies like CRISPR threaten to erase it. The patient referred to, or the hemophiliac referred to in the subheader there, is Jeff Johnson, really active community member, and a friend of mine and Natalie's, full disclosure. So it starts by just getting into a little background on Jeff as a 40-year-old guy with hemophilia. There's a reference to a recent New York Times piece on gene therapy and hemophilia, and the reference that this is something of interest in hemophilia these days, gene therapy, that is. Jeff mentions that he, on the second page, quote, "I've been told the hemophilia cure is around the corner for literally the last 30 years, which I know sounds a little cynical, but when you've been around the bend as many times as I have, you kind of start hedging your bets." Goes on to say, not Jeff the article though, he does not speak for every hemophilia patient, of course, but at a time of increasing optimism about cures, his perspective is thought-provoking. They do mention transparently, and to their credit, both the article and Jeff, that he works for a specialty pharmacy, so that he is a professional within the community as well. The interviewer, Sarah Zhang, asks, "Why are you personally not interested in a cure?" And Jeff's response, quote, "The analogy I offer people and I offer you is, as a woman, I'm sure you experience difficulties and challenges just being a woman in life. If someone came to you and said, we've got a genetic cure for being a woman, that would be really bizarre to you because being a woman is who you are. I am hemophilia. I don't have it. I am hemophilia. So when they come to me and say, we've got a genetic cure for hemophilia, to me, that's just weird, as if you said you've got a genetic cure on the horizon for your left foot. This is really who I am. So I don't necessarily see it as something that needs a cure." And then they go on to address his daughter and symptoms of hemophilia in women. And Jeff mentions that the rising awareness and data to support the impact that hemophilia and other bleeding disorders have on women. So obviously this was published. It came out through the Atlantic's online platform. Jeff posted about it. Community responses that I saw, there were some very positive. There were some that were very negative. And I want to read one comment that I printed out from a Facebook post. And this fella identifies himself as a healthcare actuary, which is a professional who uses math and statistical skills to perform various healthcare data analyses. In other words, theoretically, this person is theoretically an expert. People also need to see how expensive continual treatment for hemophilia, millions of dollars or more, and how high costs are passed on to other people with healthcare coverage. High costs mean people might go without coverage and have their health suffer. These kinds of trade-offs are necessary if healthcare is ever going to be considered affordable. He can choose to identify as a hemophiliac, but maybe should also pay more for coverage if that's his choice. A choice to forego a cure and instead receive routine treatment means poorer people might not be able to afford mandatory care that could save their life. The problem with managing hemophilia care and the cost associated with it isn't specific to hemophilia. It's specific to rare diseases within this free market system of healthcare and drug development. So it's a larger problem. Headline: The patients, plural, who don't want to be cured. Right off the bat. Subheadline: A hemophiliac says his genetic order is part of his identity, and therapies like CRISPR threaten to erase it. So it's also taking something that's not even applicable to our disease state, but has like a clickbaity, eye-catching acronym to it, and attaching it to an already mislabeled headline that, Sarah Zhang is probably not responsible for this. It's probably the editor of the magazine or the editor-in-chief or somebody, not usually headlines are written by editors, not the author. So bottom line for me, and then I'll shut up and let Natalie weigh in on this, is I think anyone has a right to their opinion and to their perspective. These kind of opportunities are going to come up. It's important that we're really mindful about what we say and how we say it, and perhaps try to work even more closely with authors or entities to make sure that what might be seen as minor editorial edits or ways to frame things don't come back to have catastrophic blowback. But I just think there were some errors made on their part that exacerbated some contributions from Jeff that perhaps could have been a little more thought out or phrased a little bit differently, or weren't considering certain other factors. So anyway, I'll pause there. Natalie, but very curious to hear your first response to this article that's created quite a bit of hubbub online the last number of weeks.
Like I do believe in costs being absorbed so that everyone can have care. But if a cure is available and you choose not to participate in that cure, I think you need to shoulder the financial burden of that. And so you can choose to live on with your very expensive disease state if you're willing to take on that financial brunt.
This is also from Jeff. As far as genetic cures go, the whole principle of changing my DNA is something I'm not comfortable with. All right. Now we're having a different argument. If you want to argue that we don't understand editing, splicing, changing your DNA and genetics well enough to comfortably accept that, hey, I know you've been taking this medication for 14 years and it's been doing you really, really well. We want to change your DNA and see if that works too. When we start restricting options, though, who's making the decisions about restrictions based on what information, and what's an oversight body to make sure that that's being done in an appropriate manner? Because when I read this, it was like, that's the missed opportunity of this article. So I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, and that's fair. And that, I'm not speaking for anyone, but I do know that there's a lot of suffering in this community. And as someone who, is considering family planning of my own, if I had a baby who there was an option to make this choice from jump, I would. Well,
and that's another great point. Let's be clear with all this discussion about cure. It's an effective cure. It is not a genetic cure. So a child would still be subject to having hemophilia. You're not going to change the carrier makeup. So it's still going to occur in 1 out of every 10,000 live births, and we're still going to need to reconcile with it. So we need community, and we can't just wait until there's another big catastrophic event. And it's not this like soft, like, oh, Jeff finds himself like Jeff is hemophilia, so we've got to just let him be hemophilia. That's not what community means. And I also feel like there was a big missed opportunity to effectively communicate why I think some people's identity, again, they talked to one guy too.
Yeah.
And they tried to make a really big nuanced point talking to one guy.
In parts of the world where they don't have access to medicine, if you said, we could cure you, most people would say, yes, please, because without treatment, which we have access to in this country, it's a very different disease, as we've traveled around the last couple of years seeing firsthand. So, it is very privileged to say, like, I would choose to keep on the path I'm on.
Yeah.
It was a really brave stance to take, and a really honest one, and I applaud him.
I do too. And look, here we are talking about it, so that's a good thing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. It was nice to hear your fresh perspective too. That was a fun way to do this. And thank you all for listening. That link is in the program notes to Jeff's article. And we'll be right back with the interview segment featuring Val Bias and Dawn Rotellini. Okay, and I am joined now by Senior Vice President and CEO of the National Hemophilia Foundation. That is Dawn Rotellini and Val Bias. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So a lot to cover, but the first thing that I actually want to chat about is Dawn. We saw each other in Scotland a couple of months ago for the WFH World Congress, and I'd be interested to hear from both of you on NHF's perspective of the World Congress and where things are with the WFH and their mission today. But Dawn, you were elected to the board of directors while we were in Scotland. So first off, congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
And what led to your wanting to run for the board? What was that process like, and what are your goals as a member of the WFH board?
So, I became really involved, or I guess more aware of WFH's mission much more in depth in 2014 when I attended my first Congress, which was in Australia. And I guess it just really brought home the mission of treatment for all. And it really shouldn't matter where you live in the world. You should have access to care and treatment if you have a bleeding disorder, or for that matter, any disease. And it sort of tied so closely with how our vision at NHF is with our chapters, is that you should be able to live in any place in the United States and also get the same level of support, services, and care. And so our missions tied so closely that when I went to that first world meeting and met people from countries that did not have access to factor, that did not have access to care, or that had to completely change the way they lived their lives to move to a place where there was care, that really impacted me. And I got more involved at that point. I have served on committees with WFH. I've had the pleasure and privilege of working with people in other countries. And I felt like now, I guess, was the time. I feel very fortunate that Val and NHF was extremely supportive of me running for a board position, and really honored and humbled by the fact that the national member organizations, we call them NMOs, of WFH trusted me to elect me to a position to serve them. And my real platform was, again, treatment for all, not just for hemophilia, but von Willebrand's disease, rare disorders like factor 10, factor 13 deficiency, and then for men and women. And so that was really what my platform was, and it's something I feel very strongly about.
And Val, for you, from an NHF perspective, Dawn, you mentioned checking in to see if that would, if running for the board would be something that would make sense. From an NHF perspective, did you see some challenges in this, Val? Did you see just opportunities, or what was your thinking when Dawn? I'm assuming, Dawn, you kind of brought this idea to Val at some point, or to a leadership committee. Val, what were your thoughts when this first came up?
I thought it was a great idea. I think since Mark Skinner had finished his presidency of WFH, there has been a change in the organization's leadership, and there's less of a U.S. presence on the national board. So I thought Dawn, in her role with NHF and leading our education efforts and outreach to other nations, was a perfect choice to add to that group at this time. From NHS perspective, we continue to be supportive of WFH. You may know we're one of the founding organizations of WFH, so we continue to support them financially, and in particular with the WFH of USA, we are particularly focused on humanitarian aid and making sure that program continues to moves forward smoothly. We did our twinning project with Nigeria, and that intrigued us even more about what we can do internationally. So we think that Dawn getting elected, that Glenn Pierce getting elected, and Barbara Conkle got elected as well to the WFH Medical. And we think that's a significant step forward for the U.S. and the world.
And now, a couple months out of the conference and of the election and of the adding of these new individuals to these leadership roles, any particular takeaways from the World Congress that stand out as being meaningful or notable in a particular way? Maybe, Dawn, this question better suited for you, and Val, if you'd like to chime in as well.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective now, 2 months out, I think it's clear the work that needs to be done. Forming a committee, I'm very fortunate to be able to head a Women with Bleeding Disorders committee. And so that will be a big priority and focus to help bring those needs and the focus to WFH. I also believe very strongly that a board of directors is the financial responsible party for the agency. And so I feel like the WFH board of directors must focus more on fundraising efforts. And I know that that is a sort of a cultural shift. It's something that would be, I mean, they certainly are aware of fundraising, but I think as a board that we should be more engaged in that process and lend our contacts and databases and ideas to that process for WFH. And so I think those are two priorities for me. I'm also part of the VWD Global Work group that WFH has. And so also bringing awareness to all of the countries about von Willebrand's disease and access to treatment is a big priority. And I think that, you know, I had said some of these things earlier, but I think now that the sleeves are rolled up and the work is starting to happen, I have a huge learning curve, of course, and so that's a big part of it, is keeping my ears open and sometimes my mouth shut, and that's not always easy for me, but it is definitely a priority to learn first where we are as an agency and then moving those priorities into that culture. I think that's really where I go.
I imagine, too, there's something kind of challenging about going from building a platform and campaigning for why you should be a board member. That's a very outward, that's talking, that's engaging, that's putting your energy out. And then when you first get elected to something or you're first a part of something new, it's often the best idea to be a little more quiet and to listen and to sim. But it's such a different skill than what just got you that seat at the table to begin with. And you have to, you know, it's an interesting process.
Yeah. And Patrick, I'll be honest with you. I didn't, in full honesty, and Val knows this, I did not anticipate actually getting elected. I really felt like this was the first foray into really talking to NMOs and listening to them and asking questions about what is it that you think WFH should be doing, and really listening to the needs of the NMOs. I really didn't think it would happen in the first time. So that's why, I mean, it really truly was a humbling experience to see the votes come up. And you're right. Now the pressure's on. I have to deliver. So I really do need to listen. And I really need to make sure that I don't come off, you know, as knowing everything, because I don't. And I've got to learn, and I've got to figure out what are the best ways to approach these goals.
Well, it's very exciting. And again, congratulations on this position.
Thank you.
Pivoting to the conference that is ahead of us now, though I may be tempted to call it annual meeting, I know better, and that it is now called the Bleeding Disorders Conference. And maybe we'll start there, Val. You had mentioned to me when we talked in December to do a 2017 kind of year in review and 2018 look ahead. We spoke for a little while about the inclusiveness that bleeding disorders as a term includes, but the equity so to speak, that hemophilia as a word has for us from an advocacy perspective, and how it's not as simple as maybe people might think it could be, or some people might think it could be, to simply change a name, but that there were these ways to roll out a name change. And you referenced at that time the Bleeding Disorders Conference, this year's meeting, being one of those pieces to get the name change moving. So beyond it just being a name change, can you talk a little about the significance of this year's conference being the Bleeding Disorders Conference? I think it's more significant than just a name change.
Well, what we're trying to do is continue to broaden the tent, as I like to say, and make sure that all people with bleeding disorders feel acknowledged and welcome, and that the National Foundation is doing something to enhance their lives and support their bleeding disorder, or at least recognize it in some way. So we've done a lot of things with the meeting in the last few years that have allowed us to expand to rare disorders, a focus on von Willebrand's disease, hosting our first LGBTQ reception last year. We want to be that organization and that people can rely on, that knows their voices are also heard within our work and our focus. And this is just the next step. In terms of, a name change that will eventually happen for NHF, and as you and I spoke about, we're known in Congress for being the National Hemophilia Foundation. So given the current congressional membership and the changes that will likely happen over the next 2 or 3 cycles, you don't want to get lost in the mix by changing your name abruptly. So we'll work with that over the next few years and make sure that we're still recognized as one of the leading organizations representing people with bleeding disorders, but at the same time starting to move away from being solely focused on hemophilia and letting everybody in our community know that the organization exists for them as well.
And at this year's conference, can you speak to how the For All Bleeding Disorders and that big tent concept, how that iterates into the conference tracks and sessions for people that have various kinds of bleeding disorders? Can you give us a little more information about the programs?
I have to leave that to the planner of the meeting, Dawn Little.
Yeah, I know I can. And I can say, Patrick, that, this is our 70th anniversary. And so I think that our messaging and our marketing is catching up to what we've actually been working on in the last 5 years. So over the past 5 years, we have added track after track after track. And we've done this not arbitrarily, but through needs assessments and surveys of the community. And so as we learned about what was needed, that's how we've added things. So currently we have 7 full tracks of education for different groups. And we talked about those groups, right? Von Willebrand's disease, women with bleeding disorders, families, and the things that we've added, like the LGBTQ reception. We've had an old guys track. We call it the geezer track, making sure that we don't forget about any part of our community. We have added a pre-conference for Factor 10 and Factor 13 that we're really proud of for the rare bleeding disorders. But we also recognize that those are 2 rare bleeding disorders. What are we doing for others? And so those are the things that we focus on. This year, I'm really excited about a pilot program. It is a very small pilot program. It's only going to be open for 15 attendees, but we're using the Bleeding Disorders Conference this year to roll out the mental health first aid program that is an educational program from the National Council for Behavioral Health. That is going to be run on Wednesday to see if we can gather some data from the attendees of that 8-hour course, and that we could literally then roll this out in the future for more attendees. So, it's more than approach of just what kind of bleeding disorder do you have, but also what are some of the significant challenges that our community is facing, and how do we as NHF address those? So just some exciting things happening.
That's really neat. And what would be the hope that with the information and takeaways from that mental health pre-con, what's the hope that that data, those insights would be used to create something that to move out to the chapter levels, or to what's the hope there?
Yeah, so the 8-hour course not only provides information on signs and symptoms of mental health and substance abuse programs, but it also equips trainees with a 5-step action plan on how to intervene. So this would be something that I would love for us to roll out to all of our chapters and to any HTC staff that would be interested, and anyone in leadership, throughout the community, to help our community deal with the issues of mental health and substance abuse problems. And so it's not even something we're creating. This is a program already in place, but we have asked, thankfully, we have a trainer that's part of our bleeding disorders community. She is volunteering her time for the pilot course. And then what we hope is that if the attendees, really truly walk away with outcomes, that we can then use that to write grants to get this funded for the future.
Excellent. And I think that the community member, Debbie De La Riva, she was speaking with us on the Ask the Expert podcast about mental health, depression, and suicide prevention recently. So it's great to see that Debbie is out on the stop, so to speak, for mental illness and mental health.
Absolutely. She's an incredible advocate, and I'm so pleased to be able to work with her on this. And the fact that she's donating her time and skills to help us pilot this is amazing. So yes, that's exactly who I'm talking about, and I'm super excited about it.
So switching gears slightly to the announcement, I guess now maybe it was a month ago, maybe a little bit longer, about the collaboration between NHF, the WFH, HFA, and ASH on guidelines for VWD treatment and management. And I was wondering if you all could share the significance of this collaboration and how the treatment and management of VWD has maybe evolved even since just last year's conference. Obviously, only so much can happen in a year, but then again, I think it's useful to track even the little steps forward that we take. So who wants to take a crack at that, Bat? What's the significance of this collaboration on these guidelines, and how in general have we evolved the way we talk about treatment and management of VWD in the last year?
Well, the guidelines... Yeah, the guidelines are significant because the first set of guidelines that were done by NIH through National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute had expired. Guidelines are only good for about 5 years, and then they have to be renewed with whatever new data has been added or new articles have been written. So there was a need to have the guidelines updated. So we took that on with the American Society of Hematology, and that's a significant step for us because the American Society of Hematology generally has not worked with a consumer organization in the past. So that was, we thought, a huge partnership for us to be a part of. And then ISTH and WFH also joined the process. So it is truly a collaboration between scientific medical organizations and consumer organizations. And that's a big step forward in terms of how we look at producing guidelines in the future. You may know that NHF's interest in these areas these days are around quality of life issues for patients. Many products in the pipeline, many new opportunities to have an impact on people's lives. And we want to make sure that as these products hit the market, as these innovations in terms of mental health and other support that we can provide to the community has a real impact on their quality of life. It's no longer just about living with your bleeding disorder. It's about living a life sort of in spite of your bleeding disorder. Treatment's great, but you need to be able to come home, play with your children, continue to work full time, and continue to work full time and lead a very full and productive life. And I think these guidelines are one step in that direction, and I hope they'll lead to other guideline processes in the future.
How do we make that quality of life argument in a way that is compelling and productive? And I say that with an understanding that quality of life from an insurance payer perspective can be a tricky area to navigate. And maybe I'm wrong about that, or maybe that's evolved. But if quality of life is going to be an emphasis going forward, how do we talk about it in a way that's compelling people that we need to be compelled by the argument?
Well, quality of life for a reimbursement organization means that people are compliant with their treatment. It means that they're going to incorporate what's best for them and their family into adherence practices. And if you're adherent to your medical plan, then your costs are manageable. So that works for them. The other thing that's changed with reimbursement organizations is because of lifetime caps and pre-existing conditions, for the most part being removed, and we hope that that continues to be in place. Insurance companies can't dump you anymore. They are providing health care for you for not 3 years, but 20 years, and they want to plan for that. They want to own that. So quality of life becomes an issue for them that they are trying to embrace, because they know that they're going to have this patient long term. So they want them to live a full life. They want them to live an active life. They want them to be adherent to their treatment.
And with the new treatments and the pipeline treatments that you referenced, on the whole, from NHF's perspective, how is the patient and clinician education on these new therapies and these investigational therapies going? Is NHF encouraged by the data and behavior of these companies thus far as well? So two very broad questions, obviously, but just on a whole, from an educational perspective and from a company engagement with the community perspective, how are things going when we think about new therapies and some new companies?
We've had some encouraging meetings with many of the groups that are producing these products to talk about how do we educate patients about the advances of these products and also the limitations of these products. We think it's really important that patients be aware that these products have advantages. We also want to make sure that they know if there are any risks involved with the products and what the limitations are for any of these products. So we're working together with them to coordinate what those educational brochures will look like and what they'll mean. On the other side of that, last year, NHF sponsored a program called CoreHeme, where we met with many of the product developers, government agencies to talk about the impact of these products on quality of life. Not to get too technical, but yeah, you can make a product that has a gene therapy impact that raises your trough level to 10 or 15%, which for you might be very advantageous. For others, as we know, everybody treats a little differently. You might want a 30 to 40% increase in trough or clotting ability. We want to make sure that manufacturers know from the clinical trial stage that we want the utmost viability for these products. That's what CoreHeme was about, a way to talk about that, a way to measure that, so we really impact the quality of life for the patient. And that's what we want to work toward with the manufacturers of these products in terms of education materials, so that we are transparent and we can document any concerns that they might have.
And Don, as you are traveling as much as you are and at patient meetings very regularly all around the country, do you feel like as you speak with chapter leadership and chapter members, Do you feel like people are getting the information and the education that they're wrapping their head around, as Val was just speaking of, gene therapy may result in you having a trough level equivalent to 10 to 15%, which might be suitable. Are people's brains wrapping around these ideas, or do we still have a long way to go with the educational obligation of these new products coming into our life?
Yeah, we have a long way to go. I think that there are some assumptions made when people hear gene therapy. There are interpretations of what does cure mean, and there's a bunch of misinformation out there about what is the current gene therapy, all of that. So that is definitely a high priority for education, for NHF's education department, and and also we're working with WFH and the European Hemophilia Consortium to also talk about what kinds of brochures are they creating? What are the educational? Because it's not going to just be a brochure, right? We need to make sure we have some online materials. We need face-to-face education. We need print materials because everyone learns in different ways, and we need consistent messaging. And so we have an internal staff group that is tackling this, of how are we going to do this at NHF in the right way. And then we've also had some calls with WFH and EHC to make sure that we're not all creating the same documents at the same time in different ways, and so that we're sharing with each other so that it's consistent. So it's multi-pronged approach in so many different ways, Patrick, and I think that that's part of the challenge is, oh my gosh, where do we start? And is it a simple glossary of terms that we start with? But the first thing that we identified is that our healthcare providers, our docs and nurses, they really need to be on the front line with the education so that when they speak to patients, they're speaking in the same way as well. And so I think that, we have a bunch of different audiences that we need to make sure are educated. There are going to be, of course, some of those brilliant on the front lines researchers that already know how to say this, but not everyone throughout the HTC group is going to be speaking in the same way to patients. And so I think there are a lot of things we need to do. So this is definitely a big priority and a source of my current stress. So I do think as I go throughout the country, everyone has questions about this, and everyone has a different understanding of these new therapies and gene therapy and access to it. So yeah, it's challenging.
And on the access front, and this kind of helps transition into the last category, which I wanted to discuss, which is just healthcare coverage and advocacy at large. On the access front, what's coming up there, Dawn, when thinking about new products or pipeline products?
Well, I think our public policy group does such an amazing job, but I really think it's also communication to payers about what this means, access to these. What does this mean? What does this mean to their bottom line? What does this mean for patient long-term health and outcomes? Where are the savings in that for them? Because at the end of the day, it is not our goal to bankrupt all of the insurance companies, but it is our goal to also make sure that every single person has access to the product that they need. And so that is a real goal of our public policy department. Val, I'm sure you have comments to add to that as well.
Yeah, I think I've been surprised at the willingness of reimbursement insurance companies to start to plan for these products being available to patients. So there's no real pullback in terms of not planning for the eventuality that these products will be available. Of course, cost is an unknown at this time, but the fact that they are planning for it, that they are interested, is a good sign for me. That they're not resistant to it is a really good sign in terms of moving forward. So I'm very pleased with how that discussion is going with them. I expect that there will be access. The question is how much access. Will it be the same for mild, moderate, and severe? Certainly, patients with inhibitors will be a target audience. Patients who are severe, who have high costs. The question is whether these drugs are cost-effective for other parts of our population, and how do we make them accessible. So that's one aspect to the challenges we face. And then if you want me to go on, I can talk a little bit about ACA.
Yeah, please do.
So ACA continues to be challenging as this administration continues to attempt to dismantle it at every turn. On the state level, we're most concerned with what we're calling skinny products. Those are stripped down health insurance plans that will allow states to offer health insurance that may or may not include pre-existing conditions, lifetime caps, or other of the guaranteed coverages that ACA brought to the table. So we're worried about how those are distributed. We continue to watch Medicaid and its application to populations, state by state. Those are the biggest challenges on the horizon. We won't see a lot of that until 2019, which is just around the corner in terms of that. But you can bet that Congress will continue to get rid of ACA. They're going to try to strip the individual mandate, which will essentially remove funding from the program and guaranteed access. So it is a battle that we continue to watch carefully and that we continue to fight. Our efforts at Washington Days and at the state level will focus on these key areas going forward.
And for people who are listening, attending state and national advocacy days, voting for representatives who will protect and bolster the access and affordability of care for all seems important. Is there anything else that you would recommend active community members be doing with regard to the ACA and healthcare?
I would recommend not only attending those things, but I would, where appropriate and where you're able to, is beginning to talk to people you know are running for Congress. Whether they win or not, educating people at that level so that they understand some of the challenges you face as a chronically ill patient is always a useful opportunity for your time. A politician will likely be a politician for a good period of their lives, and making a friend, making an informed friend is always to our advantage as a small community. So I would encourage people to reach out to people who are running. Certainly once they're elected, reach out to them early before you get to Washington Days. Try and introduce yourself, your disease state, and your family.
Excellent. All right. Well, just before we part ways and go back to our respective hot and sweaty August summer days, Dawn, perhaps I will ask you if you'd just like to take us through the specifics of the conference, the dates, the location, and where can people go to learn more about this year's Bleeding Disorders Conference?
Absolutely. Sorry about that. Yes. So go to hemophilia.org, and right on the front page, there's a scrolling banner that you can click on, but also the Bleeding Disorders Conference is October 11th through the 13th in beautiful, sunny Orlando, Florida. There is, once you click on that link, you can actually go into the system and see the different tracks and what those sessions are. And so it gives you an idea of you know, who is speaking, what are the sessions, and also there's a link to register right there.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you, Dawn and Val, for giving us the preview of the conference. Is there anything else to add before we say farewell?
It's just a privilege to serve our bleeding disorders community. You know, Val hears me say this all the time, but, you know, when you ask, what do you want to do when you grow up? I'm doing it. And I know that sounds so cheesy and so corny, but it is my privilege to serve our chapters and our community with bleeding disorders. And I'm so proud of the work that NHF does and also the work that WFH does.
I would echo that. This has really been a lifetime of work for me and a privilege to serve, and a privilege to work with people like Dawn who continue to help us innovate our services to people with bleeding disorders.
Oh, thank you both for all the work.
Patrick. It's all about the love.
It is. It goes a long way. Love and passion is what keeps you moving when everything else is falling apart, right? It's the love of what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So true.
Well, thank you both again. I'm going to end our recording here. Thank you to NHF Senior Vice President Dawn Rotellini and WFH Board of Directors member, as well as NHF CEO Val Bias for that preview of the 70th Annual Bleeding Disorders Conference taking place next month in Orlando, Florida. For more on the conference, hemophilia.org is the NHF website. You will see information right there on the landing page. Of course, there's also a link to NHF 2018 in the program notes. If you're interested for more information about Believe Limited's presence at the conference, I ran through at the top of the pod the various programs that we will be responsible for, information about our booth, and more. You can find that information at Believe LTD, Larry, Tom, David, BelieveLTD.com/NHF2018, and take a look there to learn more about Believe's presence at the conference. Parting shots. One last thing to leave our listeners with before we move on with our day and our month. Natalie, Rose, you are up first. What is your parting shot, bleeding disorders related or otherwise, for September?
Well, in 9 days, I am going to Vipassana.
Natalie, what's Vipassana?
It is a 10-day silent meditation retreat. And by silent, it's no verbal communication, no written communication, and no body language. So no eye contact with any humans.
Well, you can probably at least do a lot of journaling and exercising, right?
No exercising, no journaling, no reading, no technology. Phones are locked up.
I like my heart. Ryan, my Believe Limited co-founder Ryan Gielen was over here last night, and he was getting these details. He literally at one moment like had a hot flash. He took a step back. He coiled. That's what when they say like someone like recoils. He recoiled, turned a little bit white, started sweating, and then commented on his clamminess as you were going through these details. This is not a joke.
Yeah. And so one might ask why someone would want to do this.
One might, yeah, one might.
But it's a real, I mean, it changes the scape of your brain. It changes the gray matter in your brain. It is very reflective, and most people go back again.
So next month's like segment is going to be on Vipassana. If nothing else, I want to hear you because you're going to get back from Vipassana. We record the October episode
the day after I'm back.
The day after you're back. We'll have not spoken to each other in 10 days either. I'll have no idea of this whole experience.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I will bring my experience. I mean, yeah, it'll be weird to do this podcast because my vocal cords, I might, have lost muscle memory on how to speak. I don't know.
Wow.
But yeah, I'm scared, but I'm looking forward to it.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm proud of you.
Thanks. And what's your parting shot?
Last night, from the time that we're recording this, or yesterday afternoon, we had our housewarming party here in our new home in Los Angeles. We had a nice group of friends, some with their little kiddos, some with their significant others, some just as themselves, some from Believe, some from, I don't know, all the different walks of life. Some from the last place we lived in the last neighborhood.
Our old neighbors.
Where we made different neighbor friends who came to this party. And it was just a really nice way it's kind of the last thing that made the process of moving into our first home together feel like, okay,
it's officially warm.
We've done the stuff now. So that was really neat. And I'm glad we did it. And I'm glad that we didn't go like, oh, a housewarming party. Like, we're really busy. Like, we don't need to do that. Like, there's something very endearing about having your friends and your peeps and your loved ones over at your house to just be like, isn't this cool? We have a house. And then they go like, it is cool. Here's a succulent. You're like, great, have cake. Like it just made it like, oh yeah, that's why this is neat.
Well, and I think it goes back to the point we were talking about in the comment segment is community is important. And sometimes it feels hard to motivate yourself to interact with community, but in the end, it's worth it. Like my cup got filled last night as well.
Great point. Yeah. So thanks to everybody who came over. Thank you all for listening. And that is all for this episode. Special thanks to everyone at Believe Limited, the National Hemophilia Foundation, Entertainment to Effect Change, the Haemophilia Alliance, and our sponsor, Shire. Thanks as well to Clive Smith for sharing his Ironman piece, and to Val Bias and Don Rotellini for being our interview guests. Subscribe to the BloodStream Podcast, the Ask the Expert Podcast, the Powering Through Podcast, and the Bloodline special series of podcasts on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can email us at mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. You'll also find us on facebook.com/bloodstreammedia and on Twitter @bloodstreaminfo. Reminder to check out the program notes for this episode in your podcast player or on bloodstreampod.com for links and additional information about the various stories featured on this episode. My name is Patrick James Lynch.
And I'm Natalie Lynch.
And until next time,
take self-care of yourself.